Have you ever heard this viral quote? My mother said something once. You can lie down for people to walk on you, and they will still complain that you're not flat enough. So live your life. If you're a people pleaser like me, you've had to learn over and over again that nothing you can ever do will please everyone. And it's pretty inevitable that your actions are eventually going to displease someone. So just know yourself, know your worth, do your personal best, and live in peace. What is up, my witches? Welcome to the Queer Soul Alchemy Podcast, a supportive community helping queer folks to embrace their authentic selves by exploring yoga, astrology, and spirituality. I'm your host, Lee Davey. What is up, everybody? Welcome back. I'm your host and favorite queer NB priestess, Lee Davey, a 500-hour certified yoga instructor, 600-hour certified Ayurvedic health counselor, and 100% certifiable self-development nerd. And in this episode, we are discussing something that is near and dear to my heart. This is a lesson that has been coming up for me for years, you guys, and it just keeps coming back around because I so have not mastered it yet. This episode is all about boundaries, self-respect, and knowing your worth. If you've ever struggled with setting boundaries or standing up for yourself, your self-worth and self-concept plays really heavily into that. So keep listening because this episode is for you. But first, new episodes of this podcast drop every Wednesday, posted to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Please make an offering to the algorithm overlords by leaving a like, a comment, and a nice little 5-star review. And whatever platform you're listening on, subscribing or following the pod is the best free way that you can support us and help fellow queer mystics find their people. Don't miss out on exclusive access to my free self-care resource guide, which I've specifically curated for you to support your journey with spirituality. To download this guide and be the first to know about upcoming queer yoga retreats and events, please sign up for our email newsletter at youareloved.one/pod. Want to request a topic or share your story? You can message me anytime at that same link on our website, which will also always be linked in the show notes for you guys. And tell me your story for a chance to be featured on the show. Because your story matters, and sharing our stories builds community and helps us all feel a little bit less alone. All right, y'all, let's dive into today's content. Hi, I'm Lee, and I'm a recovering people pleaser. This is day 1 of my sobriety journey. So have you guys heard this viral quote before? My mother said something once. You can lie down for people to walk on you, and they will still complain that you're not flat enough. So live your life. It's been floating around on the internet for years. I first discovered it years ago, and it's apparently attributed to Mature Gambino, which is either Donald Glover himself, aka Childish Gambino, or Mature Gambino is a play on Donald Glover's stage name that is actually playfully referring to his mother. There's also this quote, givers have to set limits because takers rarely do, which is most commonly attributed to Henry Ford, but I also was not able to confirm and trace a source. Regardless, the point remains the same. If you're a people pleaser like me, you've had to learn over and over again that nothing you can ever do will please everyone. And it's pretty inevitable that at some point, your actions are eventually going to displease someone. So just know yourself, know your worth, do your personal best, and live in peace. Yeah, okay, Lee. So much easier said than done, right? So I want to preface this with the disclaimer that I am not a psychologist or sociologist. Although my yoga and Ayurveda training does include a lot of psychology, physiology, and neuroscience, I am not, nor do I in any way claim to be a licensed therapist or mental health professional. I am a holistic health, lifestyle, and wellness educator and a huge nerd who's spent countless hours consuming podcasts, audiobooks, and scholarly YouTube videos on the topics of human psychology and psychology of relationships. I've also been working with a therapist of my own for about 4 years now, and I always encourage just about everyone to work with a qualified professional therapist because I believe it can just be incredibly helpful. So everything I share in this episode is based on my own personal experience, reflection, and journey. And as I've said before, I am far from perfect, and I have yet to master this topic, but I'm learning, and my personal teaching philosophy is teach to learn. So let's do it. All right. So what are boundaries? Is this just a pop culture buzzword? I've heard it so many times, but like, what is it? In my personal journey, it's been really important to feel into that. Like, what actually are boundaries? Because it's not exactly something that is taught in school, right? It should be taught to us, in my opinion, in kindergarten, but for most people, it's not, which, again, in my opinion, is one reason why we have so many adults running around in the world today and running the world today who are acting like toddlers, throwing temper tantrums in adult bodies. So, how to set healthy boundaries and knowing what your boundaries are because it's different from person to person. It's a skill that the average person doesn't necessarily seem to have. And so that's why I really wanted to share more about this and normalize it because it's been a process for me to learn over the past several years since I found out about this concept. So, yeah, what does it mean to set a boundary? What even is a boundary? Basically, a boundary is a statement of consent. If I'm setting a boundary, I'm communicating about what I am and am not comfortable with because I know based on my own self reflection and my own self inquiry that I need certain things in order to feel good, healthy, and safe inside of relationships. Or if I don't want something in a certain relationship, that's a boundary too. I can set that boundary. So, an example would include how much time you are willing to spend with someone or how much space and personal time that you need. A boundary could be around how someone talks to you. So certain phrases or words you don't want someone to use when they're referring to you. Or a boundary would be if you yell at me, I am going to leave the room. Or if you attempt to engage in gossip with me, I am going to end the conversation. If you misgender me, I am going to remind you of my correct pronouns. Like these are all boundaries, if then statements, basically. By stating a boundary, you give someone else the opportunity to see and witness you, your humanity. And hopefully they respect the information you're sharing with them because it's important information, right? It's important to have mutual understanding in a healthy relationship. And boundaries give us information about how we can make ourselves and other people feel safe, respected, and comfortable. So that leads us into what is the point of boundaries and who are boundaries for? Boundaries are not rules for other people. They're guidelines that we set for ourselves to protect ourselves. And I've had a years long process of learning about my own boundaries and what it feels like when a boundary has been crossed. What is my go to response or my defense mechanism when a boundary has been crossed? So, boundaries are information that we can share with other people, but first we have to receive that information about ourselves, right? So we know when a boundary is crossed when our nervous system becomes activated. How do we know our nervous system is activated? If we are in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn state. So different people react different ways to their boundaries being crossed. If somebody has a fight response, then they might fight and get upset and maybe yell at a person for crossing their boundaries. If they have a flight response, then somebody crosses their boundaries and they might ghost and just disappear. And then there are the freeze and fawn responses, which I feel like are more common for many people because of social pressure. It's not socially appropriate or acceptable to fight or run away in many situations, right? We could do those things, but the response generally isn't good. So then the next stage that we go into is total nervous system shutdown, which produces the freeze or fawn response, where our nervous system believes that we are not likely to do well in this situation because if we run away, we won't survive. And if we fight, we won't survive. So the next best bet towards survival is to either freeze and play dead, so to speak, or to fawn. And the fawn response is the people pleasing. So that's what we're talking about today. So when we find ourselves having those fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses, those are all signs, information from our body, from our nervous system, that something is off. And oftentimes it's a great clue that, hey, a boundary has been crossed here. So a great way to find our boundaries, if we don't currently know what they are, is by paying attention to those nervous system clues, having awareness of the emotional and physical state of our body and the state of our mind and how those things are connected, which yoga can help with. So that mind-body connection, once we start getting in touch with it, we can understand, how does it feel in my body? when a boundary is crossed? Am I more prone to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response? And most of us are more prone to one or two, but we'll all experience all of them, I think, if pushed to a certain extent. And then converse to that, what does it feel like when my boundaries are actually being respected? Like, what does safety feel like in my body? What does respect feel like in my body? When I am effectively able to communicate a boundary and that is being respected by another person, what does that feel like? What does that sense of felt safety? What is your experience of that in your body? From a nervous system standpoint, this is what we call the ventral vagal learning and feeling zone, or the parasympathetic nervous system state, where we're feeling relaxed, open, social. We're able to communicate calmly, use rational, complex thought. When we're upset and triggered, our amygdala takes over, the stress response takes over of our brain, and then we're in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. And we're quite literally not able to access our prefrontal cortex and access complex thought. We're just in survival mode. So when you're starting off in this process, it can be challenging to actually know what your boundaries are. And sometimes, like I said, you don't know what your boundaries are until they've been crossed and you're upset. So in that case, the most effective way to handle it is to recognize based on how you're feeling. So you can understand within yourself, hey, this thing happened. This is a trigger for me. I feel upset. I feel like my nervous system is dysregulated. And explore that trigger within yourself. The first step is becoming aware of what's happening. Just awareness that I am triggered in this moment, right? Just that part is like great first step. It can be a challenge. And there's so many levels to all of this, right? That's why it can be a years long, lifelong process. And then being able to hold that feeling and explore that feeling within ourselves without projecting it onto the other person and needing to make them bad and wrong. And simply understanding I am having this emotional response because my boundary has been crossed. And then ask yourself, well, why has the boundary been crossed? And look into potential solutions from there. But first, we have to recognize the issue, right? That it's not the other person. It's something happened. A boundary was crossed, a boundary we didn't know we had, or that we did not communicate effectively, right? So boundaries give us information and things can get really deep. That information can get really, really deep the deeper we go with this work. This is shadow work. Boundary work is shadow work, you guys. So first, knowing that you are upset and being aware that a boundary has been crossed, then naming and knowing what the boundary was that has been crossed. And if you don't know what your boundaries are, then you can't communicate them with others, because if nobody knows the boundary is there, yeah, it's likely that your boundary is going to be crossed. And we don't learn this in school. So we need to give ourselves permission to even have boundaries in the first place and take the time to get to know ourselves enough to understand, again, what those boundaries are and name them, identify them. That was something my therapist helped me with so much. I do not think I would have been able to do that part just on my own, even after over a decade of practicing yoga. So again, this is why I'm such a huge proponent for everybody having a therapist. It is like doing regular workouts, but for your mind and emotions. Very important to overall well-being, in my opinion. Okay, so we've given ourselves permission to have boundaries. We've noticed when a boundary was crossed. We've identified, labeled, and named the boundary. And then the next step is to effectively communicate our boundaries with others. Again, this requires a lot of inner work, and this is an ongoing, lifelong process. For myself, I've been conditioned from childhood to scan for danger constantly, monitor other people's moods, and be a people pleaser. It's always been a quality that's really bothered me in other people, but it took me forever to realize that I too am actually a people pleaser. Growing up, I was taught that my body, my sex appeal, my ability to be understanding, my time, my energy, everything I do is actually not for me. Everything about me is actually for someone else, to birth and raise children, to please my husband, because of course I was going to have a husband, right? To support and care for other people, to be attractive and pleasing to other people, to be nice and palatable, not a burden, not inconvenient, not demanding, not ungrateful. I was raised in an environment where not only was I not taught about boundaries and therefore never knew they were a thing until adulthood, but also the adults who raised me were also not taught about boundaries. And of course, because they never knew they were allowed to have boundaries or like what boundaries are, they did not take it well at all when I started setting boundaries. They took it very personally. I've always been a naturally independent and autonomous person. And I've also always been naturally assertive, decisive, direct. And while all of these qualities are often praised in men, I have been shamed for them all. Early on, I was labeled aggressive, rebellious, difficult, dramatic, and overly sensitive by my family of origin. My boundaries were threatening. Now, this is a problem that affects so many people. It doesn't matter the gender, because we may not know that boundaries are even an option, let alone what our boundaries are and how to communicate them. And the people that raised us may not have known about any of that either. And so it's natural, I guess, if you're unaware to take something personally. And then there's the common experience of finally being able to communicate your boundaries and like working up the nerve to do that, often at the point of just being so burned out and having those boundaries be poorly received, tested, or ignored altogether. It can be so hard to set the boundaries at all. And then keeping them strong in the face of these negative reactions is even harder. So you may feel guilty, but in this case, the guilt is not a result of actually having done anything wrong. The reality is that too many people in the world will spot a person with a big heart and poor boundaries and take advantage of them without pause. It may not be malicious, intentional, or even conscious on their part to exploit such a person. The light of your love attracts those who feel disconnected from their own inner light. And the light attracts moths, so to speak. These are energy vampires. In fact, most of the time, it's not conscious or intentional, but intent does not equal impact. And if the impact is harmful to you, honey, assert your boundaries. If someone feels entitled to your energy, won't give you space, or has a problem with you protecting yourself, that is not a safe person for you to be around. You do not have to tolerate that. Okay, so what is the solution? How do we move forward from here? Cultivating self-respect and knowing your worth. I think it's really important to have a dialogue about exploring our boundaries within safe relationships. Having healthy relationships with others requires us to have a healthy relationship with ourselves, to know ourselves well enough to know what feels good to us, what our values are, and how to express our boundaries in a clear, firm, yet respectful way. So after you do the self-inquiry to understand your boundaries, the next step is learning to express them. And I want to clarify that healthy relationships do include healthy conflict. And repair from that conflict requires that everyone in the relationship feels safe enough to express their boundaries and that their boundaries are being respected. So this is a two-way street. If the person you're having a conflict with is not willing or able to complete any step in this process, then it may be for the best for you to simply walk away. However, please keep in mind that you and the other adults involved in any conflict all have an equal responsibility to maintain a safe and respectful environment. And you all also have the right to leave at any point. So do you speak to yourself in a respectful way? If not, then it'll be way more difficult to communicate respectfully with others. If someone is speaking disrespectfully to you, then it is up to you to set a boundary around what you will and will not tolerate. Sometimes it seems that there's an idea that boundaries aren't firm, but instead they're a negotiable guideline or even a challenge. Some bad actors and immature people will try to convince you that your boundary is wrong, that it's not a big deal, that you're blowing it out of proportion, or your boundary is unfair to them somehow. Please keep in mind that a person who truly respects you and values a relationship with you, not just what you can do for them, will respect and appreciate your clear boundaries. Going back to what I mentioned before, many of us have been deeply conditioned that it's not okay to set boundaries, it's not allowed, or that our boundaries hurt other people instead of creating an environment of emotional safety. In my observation, people-pleasing tendencies tend to go hand in hand with conflict avoidance in people. It's that freeze and fawn response. a survival mechanism, meaning that at some point in our early development, we learned that standing up for ourselves and setting boundaries was not a safe option, that it led to dangerous conflict or just was not an option, period. I know that I can always improve my communication, and that's something that I'm willing to work on within myself. But sometimes it honestly doesn't seem to matter if I set a boundary and am the most calm, collected, respectful human being that I can possibly be. Sometimes people still take that boundary personally, or they still get angry or upset. And I found that when this happens, generally the person is responding to something coming up within themselves, and it's not really about me. They're more just upset that I set a boundary and that they can no longer access what they once were able to access. But I'm a sensitive person. I'm very nurturing and empathetic. And if somebody's telling me that I am being cruel or harmful, I am not one to take that lightly. I'm someone that wants to understand how I'm doing harm and how I can hopefully change my behaviors. The boundary hurts people though, because they were benefiting in some way from a lack of boundaries. So it's understandable to empathize with their situation, but it's important to understand that just because they don't like it doesn't mean that setting the boundary is wrong. So this is where self-respect and knowing your worth comes in. Without those elements, toxic guilt and shame can creep in and allow you to be manipulated back out of your boundaries. If I think back to the times when my boundaries have been crossed, it was either because I didn't know that there was a boundary there or because of the people-pleasing tendencies. I didn't have the self-worth and confidence to stand up for myself and really make that boundary clear. So for a long time, I stayed in this limbo, subconsciously basing my self-worth off of how much I could give to others, how well I could take care of and fix the people in my life, and how convenient and little of a burden I could make myself. Never having needs of my own, always needing the needs of others, burning out over and over again from overgiving, losing my temper on people out of built-up resentment, and mistaking codependency for love. And I'm done with that now. From here on out, I am trying to just be the personal best that I can be, and by no means do I claim to be perfect. But if someone is making me uncomfortable in my own space, or being disrespectful, or expecting an inappropriate amount of mental, emotional, or physical labor from me, boundaries will be set. And they will be set firmly, swiftly, and often. If I let you know, and you're receptive to my boundaries, then wonderful. We can move together toward a stronger, more healthy relationship. But if I set a boundary and you ignore it or attempt to criticize me or talk me out of it, I will not be backing down. I am going to be firmer and louder if I need to be. If I set a boundary with you multiple times and you continue to disrespect me, attempt to manipulate me, or act entitled to my time and energy, then honey, don't be surprised when I become even more assertive and use a tone of voice that may not feel great to you. And over again, instead of focusing on the disrespect and the boundary violations that actually led to me being firmer when asserting my boundaries, that tone is framed as the issue. And this is called tone policing. It can be used to deflect accountability away from the person whose original behavior was harmful. So I don't know what step we're on by now. Maybe step number 5 for me on this journey of self-love and self-worth has been imperative to realize that not only am I allowed to have boundaries and set them, I am 100% allowed to be firm about it. Being assertive is not the same as being mean. Self-advocacy is not the same as attacking someone. If someone doesn't like my tone or the way I'm speaking to them, it is absolutely within their right to remove themselves from the situation. That is their own boundary. If you do X, then I do Y. Again, remember, boundaries are meant to protect us, not punish other people. Whenever I set boundaries, I am direct and clear. And I often find that others interpret this direct, assertive communication style as aggressive because we live in a culture that discourages and heavily demonizes anyone who is not a cishet white man that dares to be assertive and advocate for themselves. So I no longer have the energy for anyone who's going to try to shame or guilt trip me out of having boundaries or emotionally manipulate me out of having them. Honestly, in years of experience with upsetting others by setting boundaries, it doesn't seem to matter how I do it. In person, over the phone, over text, trying to tone police myself to be as calm and measured as possible, or fawning and sugarcoating to the point of boundaries being vague, or losing my temper and flying off the handle listing every way the person has ever wronged me. Regardless of the strategy, the outcome is overwhelmingly the same. People do not seem to respond very well to others setting boundaries. That's a huge problem, you guys. Like, in my opinion, the vast majority of people severely lack relational skills when it comes to consent, direct communication, conflict resolution, and respecting boundaries. Again, we're not taught these things in school, and yet we wonder why there's a loneliness epidemic. So just know that if you're really doing the self-reflection and trying your best every day to be as full of as much love as you can, then the people who are for you are going to find you. And they're going to see you in your realness, your authenticity, and appreciate you for it. People who are for you in this life are going to want you to set boundaries. They're going to be receptive to those boundaries because they see you as a person who deserves to feel comfortable and respected and to have their own safe physical, mental, and emotional space. If someone tries to shame or blame you out of having boundaries, you don't need them, honey. If they say you've changed, guess what? That's what we're here to do, to grow and learn. The people who are really about you in this lifetime are going to want you to grow and learn. And they'll grow and learn right alongside you. They're not going to shame you for doing so or make you feel guilty for taking care of yourself. So just keep shining your light, doing your thing, and you'll be loved for it. I love you. All right, you guys. So where do you see this in your daily life? I'm super curious. Share it in the comments below and then pause the video to go grab your journal and write down these writing prompts. So our reflection journaling prompts for this episode are: what are 3 non-negotiable boundaries that you have in relationships? Write them as if-then statements. For example, if you yell at me, then I will leave the room. How can you proactively communicate these boundaries to the important people in your life? To summarize, in this episode, we discussed important lessons that are near and dear to my heart, as these themes have been coming up for me for years, and it just keeps coming back around. We learned what boundaries are and how to set them, what is the point of boundaries and who are they for, and how self-respect and knowing your worth factor into our ability to set boundaries clearly and hold them firmly. If this episode resonated with you, please share in the comments. Don't forget to download your free self-care resource guide by signing up for our email newsletter on the QSA website at youareloved.ome/pod. And join our online community for just $11 per month to access exclusive yoga and meditation practices guided by yours truly, over 10 hours of video workshops on various spiritual topics, and meet like-minded queer folks who are also on a yogic path and spiritual journey. That link will be in the show notes for you guys as well. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, let's stay connected and stay witchy. I'll talk to you soon, and blessed be with all my love, Lee Davy.